Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to be talking about how to lead without losing yourself. I'm excited to welcome to today's podcast Dr. Lisa Ann Ferlita, who is the Vice President of Service for the Americas at Oxford Instruments and newly published author. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me here today. I'm pretty excited. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to have you. So, we have a lot to get into today. Let's start with a bit of background. So, what can you tell our listeners about, your journey to today? There's some different sort of chapters that you shared with me. If you can kind of give folks a bit of context.
No, absolutely. I would say that my journey is extremely eclectic, unlike others that you may have spoken to in the past. I was in the military for 10 years, served in the Air Force. When I got out of the Air Force, I went into construction. Unfortunately, we had the downturn in the construction society during the downturn back in the early 2000s. Didn't really know what I wanted to do and where I would fit in, so I decided to go into manufacturing. Since I felt this connection about service and servicing people and working in the operations side, I really started there. Looking into myself and like, what can I do to add this value, not just myself, but to my employers and where I was working, and what does that growth look like? So it's a very eclectic journey. Resilience was key going through that, and also, building myself up from a very disciplined of military where everything was black and white, and then going into the civilian sector. So it's been an interesting journey to date, and I've learned a lot around the globe,
Yeah.
especially working in 129 countries I've been in.
Yeah, I
So,
was gonna say, I know you shared that that's a big part of your journey as well. And we spoke a bit about how much you learn working in areas that you're not from, not only about different cultures and different ways of working and different practices and processes, but even about yourself. And I know that's been a big part of your professional and personal evolution, I guess.
no, 100%. So I would say I learned more about myself and how to evolve because of the opportunities that were afforded working in those 129 countries, and understanding different types of adaptions that I had to go through, not just for my employer, but also for myself,
Hmm.
which was extremely important.
Yeah, yeah. So, alongside your current role at Oxford Instruments, you've just published a book called The Weight of Leadership: Leading Without Losing Yourself. What inspired you to write this book and share the reflections that you're sharing?
No, that's a really good question. And I'm so happy that you presented it in this podcast today. I am a voracious reader. If somebody was to look at my Kindle, they said, well, this woman only reads self-help books. How does she become better? And most of the books that I read from amazing authors that I were able to take away had to do with like not just leadership, but building yourself, but it was corporate related, where they would investigate in organizations, and then they would tell somebody as a leader, if you want to lead like this and have these types of results, this is really what you should be doing because it's successful at, General Motors, it's successful at IBM, all these large, it's successful at Google, it's successful at Amazon. But what I saw myself as I traveled and sat with seatmates around the world on airplanes is that, did really anybody come forward beyond, like the emotional intelligence framework books that are out there by Dan Gorman and others, say how to apply this to yourself and not just to metrics within an organization. So I took a step back and I said, if I'm going to write this book, I really need to look in the mirror and be honest with the readers so they not only hear it, they feel it, and they can relate to it. So I looked back and said, there was so much loneliness when you're a leader, and I really chased the titles and the personal growth and the extended strengths for me to have this growth personally and professionally. I wanted to have the raw honesty, putting that out there. And I also wanted to get some healing through this writing as well. Right. And I think we don't pause enough as a leader. I know I don't, to give my permission to feel what's
Mhm.
going on around me. Did I do enough? Is it going to resonate? And to be successful, I think we need to be honest with how did we get here? And it's not just because you rolled out of bed and somebody thought your resume was perfect and hired you. It's a struggle
Hmm.
to create and define what success is you as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're speaking a lot about sort of the like the behind the scenes personal experiences that you've gone through as you've progressed in your journey. And I think that sort of honesty and vulnerability is really important. To your point, I'm also a big reader, and I think, there's never too many books, right? Like, it's great to understand different perspectives and different types of knowledge, right? But there is definitely a place for, the power to connect vulnerably as human beings and talk about some of the things that maybe people aren't as apt to talk about. So
Right.
go ahead.
No, right, absolutely. And I purposely, once I wrote the book and I went through it, and we don't, nobody writes a book in the order that we want to write it in. I said, what can I leave the reader with? So at the end of every chapter, there's actually reflective questions for the reader to ask themselves,
Hmm.
and leadership reflections to put them in that mindset. So I really believe that's going to help the readers not just read it and go, okay, that's one person, that's great, but what do I do and how do I look at myself? So I wanted to carry that forward at the end of every chapter as well.
Yeah. So the book is broken into four sections, and I thought if you're willing, you could kind of pick a story or a lesson or reflection from each section to share with us. So the first section is becoming.
Yeah, so becoming is, if you sit back and we talk through these chapters, becoming is like, where does it start, right? So, I want the readers to get excited about the first chapter as much as they do on the last word that resonates with them. So in becoming, I break it down where, I was raised by a single mother who worked seriously hard at IBM back in the day where, most women had administrative roles, but by no means does becoming mean that this is a book about just for women leadership. I believe it applies to all genders and all cultures. So from there, I was looked at my mom and I said, wow, she's working all the time hard and she wasn't home enough. And it was just my brother and I. So I said, how do I survive? How do I become better? And so I was told leaders were always born. We've heard that, right? Like, oh, you're born a leader. I would say that my becoming a leader became from survival. It
Hmm.
was a survival mindset where I sat back and said, okay, how do I become responsible for myself? Because my mom's carrying the weight for
Hmm.
the family, right? My brother's carrying the weight because he's the older brother to his youngest sister, right? The schools were carrying the weight. And when I looked around and I saw the success that people did naturally and organically, and I'm like, how do I find myself and how do I survive? How do I go through the confidence of even carrying that responsibility for myself at a very young age, as well as how do I find my voice as a woman to become a leader in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, even today, knowing that it's predominantly a male dominated society. And then when I traveled, right? And I went around and I said, how am I learning from these cultures that it's not about work and the fast pace of the American decisiveness where you get to the point? It's about connecting with people,
Hmm.
becoming human. And that's how I learned to survive, is really sitting back and observing and listening and looking myself in the mirror and said, how do I become that? And that's what that entire part is about. And it grows from my childhood all the way through leadership across the borders and what I was taught.
Yeah. I think what you just said is really interesting. Becoming a leader is becoming human, and the connection between those two things. So the next section is the book in the book is leading. So how do you transition from becoming to, the phase where you've found yourself leading, and what can you share with us from that section?
Yeah, so I would tell you, in some of those subsections, we talk about the pressure of the title. I thought for a long period of my employment in any organization that being a leader and after becoming one meant working hard, always being on, always saying the right thing, never disagreeing, right? Being politically correct in everything that we do, holding people in a micromanagement type of style instead of an accountability style.
Mhm.
I thought it was controlling the journey, making sure that people were doing what they were told to do and delivering when they had to. I didn't realize that the leading, as I go through the rest of the chapters about the human side of service and the loneliness of leadership, I didn't realize that I'd have such heavy weight going, did I say the right thing?
Mhm.
Did I leave the imprint? Am I helping my team enough? Did I give them the tools? Right? Will people let me have that voice? So I kept questioning myself as a leader. Am I doing enough?
Mhm.
Am I being heard? Is my delivery, is my message there? So I learned through that leading about it's about empowering your people,
Mhm.
having trust over the control, helping others grow, protecting those people during hard times, listening to them. So
Mhm.
out of that leading, I created three pillars of leadership. I don't really fit in a leadership academia silo. I believe leadership is for me, I lead by empowering people, making sure they're heard, and making sure they're having inclusivity because I don't want them to fall into the weight that I carried thinking I knew what leadership was.
Mhm. Yeah, we talked a bit about, you spend a certain portion of time, where you've been through this becoming process, right? And you find yourself now in the role, but almost acting as a version of what you think a leader is supposed to be, right? So like you said, you're kind of finding your own place as you make, some missteps and then also have to reconcile some of those realities of like, wow, this is really lonely. Wow, I'm doubting myself every step of the way. Those are things that, you know, aren't necessarily taught in a book or you might not expect that you feel once you get into that role. And so uh yeah, it's a continuation of the becoming in some sense, because
Yeah,
you're refining, okay, well, now I'm a leader, but what does that mean for me and how do I apply what I'm learning works and feels authentic or genuine?
yeah, absolutely. And and I'm carrying in this chapter, you feel me carrying that weight
Hmm.
of leadership in that chapter, which gets us to the next part.
Yeah, which is rebuilding.
Yeah, absolutely. So in rebuilding, I discuss like where, I'm on my brain, it's active, it's engaged, my emails are up and running. I go to a hotel room. I just had a long meeting or we went to a convention. You go to the hotel room, you're sitting there, and you turn your emails on, you're catching up, you're getting it done. I'm sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. And I know I kind of went through that very quickly because I feel like that was the urgency pace
Hmm.
at that time. So, and then I'm in a conference and I'm walking around and I'm like, I feel bad. I'm starting to feel my body breaking down, where my body is talking to me, and it's not about the brain, it's about the physical body where I'm feeling exhausted. I describe where I'm in a conference and I'm looking around and there's so much energy and I'm having trouble even taking another step. My legs are feeling heavy. I didn't have a medical condition, but I definitely felt where my body was like, when is being a leader too much, where your body starts speaking to you? And the entire time, I thought I was leading my body forward with the titles and the travel and the teaching and lessons. And then when I started absorbing and carrying that weight, my body's like, I'm gonna break. I can only
Hmm.
carry so much. And it started speaking to me. And so through the rebuilding chapter, I talk about like identifying that in myself and then reflecting on it. And then in midlife, I think most of us have this pause and say, am I really rebuilding just my physical, or do I need to rebuild my mental as well?
Hmm.
And if I take that pause, does that mean other people are going to see me less as a leader?
Hmm.
All these things come out like, how do I let go of a high achiever? How do I say to myself, it's okay not to be perfect?
Hmm.
And how do I learn to be softer, right, in rebuilding, but yet still hold myself accountable?
Hmm.
And, this, I would tell you, rebuilding part three is probably the most emotional and the most raw that I go through. Because there's times where eventually I go back to my hotel room, I look in the mirror, and I don't even recognize myself anymore,
Hmm.
Sarah, where I'm just like, who am I? I
Hmm.
look tired. I look worn down. I probably 50 to 60 pounds heavier than I thought that I would ever be in my life.
Hmm.
And, then I talk about like, what does strength really mean as a leader? Well,
Hmm.
strength is also physical, mental, and the strength that you give to others,
Hmm.
right? So why carry that weight of leadership by yourself when you should be spreading that out to help them grow and develop instead of taking it all in?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to this piece. I think strength is not always continuing to push. I think to your point, you know, you find yourself, many people find themselves, in this fast pace upward trajectory that, kind of comes out of those early phases where, you decide what you want to do, you go after it, and next thing you know, you've achieved it or some level of it. And so you're showing up and you're showing up, and then you kind of reach a point where you realize that you can't keep that pace forever, or, there might be aspects of what you thought you wanted that don't actually add up to, make you as happy as you thought they would, or what have you. And I think that when last week's podcast, we had a consultant on that was talking about employer branding, and we were talking about the fact that for today's talent, work-life balance and flexibility are so important. I think there's a real thing here to like the learnings you've had about what the role is and what toll it can take, and like what matters most, right? Like how do you
absolutely.
keep a better balance of, accomplishing what you want, but not at the detriment of who you are, physically and emotionally. I think
Right.
there's a learning there that could help leaders be more effective with today's talent, because today's talent prioritizes those things more than generationally we did. Do you know what I mean? Like we were more apt to
Absolutely.
come in and go hard until you kind of hit this point, and they're kind of coming in with this understanding that there's more that matters already. So I think there's a way to take some of those lessons and help you think about, what kind of this next phase of work even looks like, and how do we kind of, is it possible to protect people from experiencing some of the hard parts of this journey that you've experienced if we kind
Yeah.
of have more open dialogue and we talk more about, protecting your energy and taking care of yourself, et cetera. I just think it's a really
No,
interesting thing to reflect
thank you. No, thank you. And that leads us into the next part, right? So, when we talk about legacy, I want to go to conferences where I understand what's, conferences in any industry, especially leadership and growth and service. I want to hear what's happening in the environment to which we work, but I also want to hear people say, listen, this is, I'm standing up today as the vice president or the CEO or the CFO or a senior caregiver of an organization, or even of a parent or a family member, or a family member that's going on in their life. I originally thought that having these titles and getting all this work done and being a high achiever, when people used to say to me, Sarah, I want to be just like you, I say to them, you don't.
Mhm.
I don't want you to be like me. So that gets me to the legacy part, right? So my impact that I want to make on people, I want them to be seen. I want them to have the opportunities to spread out that weight. I want them to have the strength, not just mentally, but physically. And I want them to understand compassion. I want them to understand, regardless of what role you play or what gender you are today, titles mean nothing if you're losing yourself,
Hmm.
right? And I just, the legacy that I want to leave is like, I want a leader to leave somebody better, not to tell them, don't spend family time. I have people today who are like, hey, Lisa, I got this done over the weekend. My response is, I'm sorry you had to work over the weekend. I wish we would have talked about it. Your
Hmm.
weekends are more important. I never had that. Even today, I'm still learning. I'm not perfect. It wasn't linear. The journey was like a roller
Hmm.
coaster, and it still is. And I still lean back where I'm on myself. You need to do better. You need to get it done. So, but this legacy chapter, really, I want people to say, okay, I don't want to be like Lisa, but what do I leave as a legacy in any role that I have where others, human beings, are looking up or next to me
Hmm.
on how I behave? So it's connecting that humanity.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, when people at your level, VP level, C level, in different industries and different roles and functions can be vulnerable the way you are about like, hey, here's what you see. Okay. And like those things are true, right? Like I've accomplished what I've accomplished, or I've, done this, that, and the other, but there's a lot you don't see, right? And so being open about that, it destigmatizes, it normalizes, and it allows for the conversation to shift to how can work become, more sustainable, where it isn't this idea that, you to become what you want to become professionally, you find yourself looking in the mirror saying, like, I don't even know who you are. I just had a conversation with someone a few weeks ago who wants to have me on their podcast. And we were talking about what to talk about, and she said, I just think maybe you could give people advice on like how to juggle so much. And I'm like, no, I don't think I can. I, because the thing is, it is to my own detriment. And that is the reality. I mean, I'm in a phase of reconciliation of a lot of the same things that you're talking about in this book, like what is the cost and is it worth it? And is there a way to do it differently? Or, you know, what am I willing to sacrifice and when and how? And, I think the other thing that is important to say is while any of this applies to everyone, I think as women and as moms,
Yeah,
we are very apt to put our own needs last.
right.
And there are a lot of societal factors that exacerbate that tendency. And I just think, those are also issues that I don't necessarily have the answers for, but we need to be having a lot more conversations about because, I think that women have an incredible amount of knowledge and value and magic to add to the corporate world. But to do that well and have a family is incredibly draining at
Yeah.
best. So,
No, 100%. I mean, I'm going to double click on a couple of things that you said there. I mean, that sustainability is key, and then recognizing in yourself that, it's removing the armor, that
mhm,
vulnerability. Like, okay, we need to take off our armor and have more of these discussions because what you're seeing front facing may not be really what's going on behind the scenes, and we need to be more authentic, and we need to give people space to be fair, to not be afraid of being judged of what they're saying. I mean, like I said, my book is pretty raw, and those who read it, and I'm humbled who do and reflect on it, they're going to say, "Oh, now I know why Lisa has worked like this because of this type of journey. And, there's nothing magical in there except for me telling you the experiences over my career through a very interesting work path. But if we sit back and say, is it really organizational related? What about the folks that are just trying to make it every day just to support their families, male,
Mhm.
female, whoever it is? They have weight themselves that they carry. So, how do you care for others if you can't even begin to take a pause to care at yourself? And
Mhm.
that's dangerous. And I agree 100%. I would love to sit in a circle with like-minded folks that feel comfortable enough to share their experiences and elevate it at a platform and drive this not just within a single culture, but around the globe as well.
Yeah.
People, no matter their titles, they want to be loved. They
Mhm.
want to be successful. They want to be heard. They want to be part of a group or an organization or something.
Mhm.
So we're more alike than we are different, Sarah, and we need to recognize that more frequently.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, to your point on the legacy piece, I think when when we can be brave enough to be more vulnerable, right? Like if you in sharing this help, a younger leader coming up when they get into some of those positions and they doubt themselves, then they know that's normal. And there's a lot of power in just that, right? To, normalize those experiences. And I think there's also a responsibility, from an organizational perspective, an industry perspective, a corporate perspective to think about like how do we improve some of these realities? Like how can we, accomplish what we need to without it harming, human beings. I do believe that that's possible. I think it just requires people to think a little bit differently, and a lot of it is just like you said, connect on that human level and listen to people and make sure that they feel heard and feel that they matter.
Yeah.
So
100%. 100%.
so I know you already said this and you shared with me this is not a book where you're saying here's everything I've learned, I've figured it out, and if you read this, you'll have all the answers. You said it's still unfolding and you're still learning, and I think that that is really brave. You said to me that you've always been more concerned about letting others down than letting yourself down. And I feel that to my core.
Right.
I'm curious though, as you've reflected in the way you have to be able to put this into a book, um, what's an area that you've noticed that you have been able to make an improvement or, find some resolution on?
I gave myself grace
Hmm.
just by writing this book and reading it and going through this past year and a half. I let my emotions surface now. So people see my emotions, that things transform me as well. I asked my team for support. Hi, this just came in. I'm on the road traveling. I was wondering if I believe in you, right? I use words like I believe in you to more people now where people didn't believe themselves. I imprint empowerment more to people. Even if I think they're not going to be able to do it, I still give them the opportunity. I pause. Like I said, I give myself grace. I look more for personal healing in days that are heavy.
Hmm.
Just yesterday, met with a customer, love our customers here, love every single one of my customers. And, at the end of the day, I looked at my team and she said, you know what? It's a beautiful day. We're going to go sit outside and let's talk about what you did over this past long weekend. Share with me your family experiences. What kind of barbecues did you have? What did you put on the grill? Who came over? And the team was just like, I really appreciate that. It's always not about metrics.
Hmm.
It's always not about, what's my rating going to be or my bonus going to be or am I working hard enough to get a pay raise? So I pause more to know more about my team, more about my seatmate on the airplane, and listen more and I take in more instead of just reacting and saying this is what we need to do.
Hmm.
So I'm grateful for that, and the book really put that in a great perspective for me to sit back and reflect on how it came through
Hmm.
on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to switch gears just slightly and talk about transformation in the service context. So you said transformation is it's all about mindset, which I think most people would agree with. What do you think leaders most commonly get wrong in how they approach transformation, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, so I think leaders, and I will put myself in this group, Sarah, to be very open with you, at a moment of my leadership journey, I really thought that driving the mission of an organization and having key performance metrics and key performance indicators and net promoter scores was a framework on
Mm-hmm.
how I had to lead my team. I reverse engineered it. I want transformation to be a mindset. I'm out in the field now, at the service level. I have a round table where I want service engineers to come to the table and feel comfortable enough in that environment, like we talked about earlier, to say what's really going on. I reach out to people. I've seen people say, well, one-on-ones don't mean anything. Well, as a leader, you shouldn't drive the one-on-one. You should open the door to allow a one-on-one to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if people want to come into me directly, and not go through the hierarchy of an organization, which I think leaders miss. Leave your door open more for anybody in your organization to come to you and have a conversation,
Yeah.
right? Let the person vent to whom they believe has the most attractiveness in the organization, that they're going to be heard. And
Mm-hmm.
then as a leader, it's your responsibility to carry that voice out and figure who the right people are in your organization. So don't run your leadership saying you can't speak to me unless you speak to your direct manager. Don't run your organization just on KPIs alone.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, be more human, have more
Mm-hmm.
humanity, less hierarchy. Emotional intelligence, was a buzzword for a while. It's real.
Mm-hmm.
People stay with other leaders because you're giving them influence of lived experience over the authority to tell somebody what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell you, as a leader, it took a long time for me to realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Storytell. When somebody's stuck, don't say, this is how you fix it. Say, I've been there. Let me
Mm-hmm.
tell you what I did. Maybe you can apply some of this. Get back to me and let me know how it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have all the answers, and don't try to pretend you do.
Yeah.
So, great question. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I
Yeah.
think I love the point you made about reverse engineering because I think, so many of the KPIs that we're driving, they're really lagging indicators. And if we can step back into then what are the leading indicators, right? If I want to achieve this NPS score, what is it going to take within my team to do that? And
Yeah.
how am I or how are we doing at these things, right? I also like your point about, making yourself more accessible. And a quick story on that. There's a gentleman, James Milet. He's in a different role now. He's the CEO of Smart Care. But a couple of years ago, I went to see him in Texas. He, at the time, was with Schneider Electric. And he met me in the lobby and we grabbed a coffee in the kitchenette and he's like, all right, well, let me show you around, so he gave me a bit of a tour and I said, where's your office? And he's like, oh, I don't have one. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I don't want to have an office because then I'm closed off from everyone. So when I'm here, I either work in a common area or if I have calls, I'll step into a conference room, but that way I get to interact so much more with the people here. And I thought, like, I mean, it's brilliant in terms of what you can pick up in those water cooler interactions, but also the lack of ego of,
Mhm.
well, I'm an SVP, so I must have a corner office. I just thought like, oh, yeah, this is how you do it, So,
Yeah, I'll be happy with a cubicle. I worked at one
mhm,
organization. They had me where all the executive leaders were. And I went to the facilities manager and said, hey, my team's on the other side. He's like, yeah, but you're in the executive leadership corner. And I literally walked over there, looked around. I went back to the facilities manager. I said, can I sit here? He's like, well, that's a cubicle. I said, okay, because there's a framework based on your title. And I said, okay, well, this right here is a closet. If I move the stuff out of the closet, can I just put a table in here with a chair? And that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, 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 we'll move you over here. It's a little bit bigger. I said, it doesn't matter. But I find I spend 90% of my time when I'm in home office, because, as leaders, we do travel quite a bit and
Yeah.
it's expected of us. I like to walk out and I always tell people I'm stretching my legs, got to do hip flexors, right? Because we're sitting at our decks. But how are you doing? So leaders also need to take that pause. So I'm really, thank you for sharing that story. It resonates deeply with me as well, Sarah. And I think there should be more leaders like that, managers like that, that get out there a little bit more when they're not a work from home or they're not remote or they're not traveling and they're in a corporate office and say, I just want to spend 5 minutes. Tell me what's going on here. How you doing? Like what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And again, you're listening to the people that are right there to reverse those engineering of
Mhm.
those NPS and those KPIs for an organization.
Yeah, it's a wealth of knowledge. So you told me next generation leadership isn't about titles, it's about human impact. How, what does that mean to you in relation to how you've noticed leadership evolving, today versus what it was even 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I would say every day it evolves, especially in the shoes that I wear. But if we talk about 5 years ago, leadership was about title, office, salary, meeting metrics, driving your team, keeping your team there. Why do you have attrition? It must be something with a leader that's going on. So make sure your team is kept happy. As we evolved through the era between 2019 through today, I would say leadership needs to be evolving to more about the integrity, consistency as a leader is important. Providing more vision as a leader across the board, and how does that in your individual teammates or the organization plug into that vision? A lot of people are like, I know we have a mission statement, I know we have a vision statement, but what am I specifically contributing to?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think we have engagement of junior leaders are asking more questions. Explain this to me. I think they're asking more questions like, tell me how I add this value or how can I help you more? I'm hearing that every single day. And that definitely is a transition that happened 5 to 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think trust is big too,
Trust.
psychological safety, right? Um, those things are important, and I think increasingly so as we see the evolution of AI and how that will affect the leader-employee relationships and what traits are most important.
And I think, Sarah, people want to be held accountable in the right tone, in the right way,
Yeah.
right? I haven't met somebody who didn't say, "Hey, I'm not accountable for that." I stopped hearing that's not my job. I start hearing, how do I help and how do I be your accountability partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? To make you successful, just reach out, right? So I think accountability is real also for that leadership.
Yeah. So, I guess on that point, what is a timeless leadership trait, skill, or practice that you feel has helped you in your career, but will still be relevant in another 10, 20 years?
Well, I'm going to take you back, Sarah. I'm going to take you
Okay.
back to the 1980s
Okay.
when Edwards Deming brought over total quality management, right? In the 80s, TQM was on fire, right? Everybody wanted to have like standard operating procedures, quality processes, right? There's a saying that we had back in the 80s that resonates to me today. It's do what you say what you do, and prove it. I lean into that. When I open up my voice to others and say, this is what I believe we could be doing, it doesn't mean that I'm not listening, right? But it doesn't mean that I'm going to pivot so drastically and change shifts every often. So do what you say,
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate it by saying what you did and proving it by sharing with others.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that was the 80s. We're in 2026 today. And I know TQM has evolved to international standards of organizational standards, ISO, and it's very manufacturing related. But that resonated with me when I started learning about quality, because in my chapter, I talk about how I started learning my voice when people realize when Lisa shows up,
Mm-hmm.
she's going to actually have her homework and her mission completed,
Yeah.
right? And so that's when people took pause and started listening to me because I did what I said what I did, and I demonstrated it. So I don't think that's going to change. I really don't.
Yeah, and I mean it goes back to trust, right? That's how you
Yep.
earn trust with the people that you lead, follow through on what you say you're going to do and be intentional with your word, don't um give platitudes, don't, make stuff up because you don't have a real answer. Be honest, be transparent, be trustworthy, and that goes a really long way. So,
And if you can't do it, step in and say, listen, I know I committed. I need to take a step back. Give
mhm.
yourself grace and pause. And I overcommitted. I
Yeah,
can do it at a certain date. So I think that is part of that trust and accountability. People are like, listen, I know this is what Lisa said, but if she can't get it done, I'm confident she's going to come back and tell me why.
yeah.
Right. Without saying like the dog ate the homework. Right. So
Mhm.
like real transactional reasons and not because I gave up on myself.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we need to step forward and have that. And I think when you deliver that message, the person who receives it needs to give you grace to know it's okay.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Really good stuff, Lisa. So the book is out now. Tell folks where they can find it and or connect with you.
Yeah, that's great. So I have Kindle and hard book is out on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon.com and find that. And also the paperback is coming out tomorrow, and you can have that also on Amazon. If you're interested in hearing more and want to connect me and have discussions, and Sarah, I'm grateful for today as well, and have more discussions with me. I do have a website. It's Dr. Lisa Ferlita .com. So it's drlisaferlita.com. And you can reach out to me, and you can also join the community if you want to get newsletters and insights that are published monthly as well.
Wonderful. That's great, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining. We will include those links for everyone in the show notes. And I
Thank you.
appreciate your insight. And like I said, I think it's great that you have taken the opportunity to be vulnerable and share, some of the aspects of your journey that people wouldn't know if you weren't willing to speak the truth. So I think I'm glad it's helped you, but I think it'll help a lot of others too. So kudos to you for being brave and being bold.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm really honored to be part of your Unscripted podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can find more by visiting the home of Unscripted at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.